In 1955, he recorded "Ain't That a Shame," which was another hit. Pat Boone, who we just talked about, he once again recorded the same song, and it actually charted #1 on the pop charts. Where Ain't That a Shame" by Fats Domino didn't make it quite so high. And this is kind of a reoccurring theme as I talk about, and I think it's really a good example of like a cultural appropriation. I think in these days cultural appropriation comes up a lot, and one of the things about this time period in music was you had a lot of black artists, charting high enough or being socially accepted by the mainstream for the first time, and getting a much more success than they had in the past. And then reoccurring theme is the white artists, you know, taking the songs, either covering it exactly how it was written, or covering a more socially acceptable or radio friendly version. And I think it's a really good example of cultural appropriation, just because in this case they're taking a song that was really based on the experiences, the culture of the black community, and you're kind of extracting some of the parts that don't fit with the mainstream community, which would be the white community in this case, and then you're taking that and releasing it, and making a significant profit or success over that. And so I think it's a pretty good definition, because I think sometimes that term might be thrown around pretty liberally, but I think in this case you have a clear case where one culture is really extracting, taking something that was from one culture and really extracting and altering it so it can be more profitable and successful in another scenario. And that's something that Pat Boone in this case has been on the list a couple times doing that. And of course Elvis Presley is probably the most well known. But I think if you're gonna, in Elvis Presley's case, if you're gonna take that approach, you should probably be the best at it, and be a great musician and great artist in your own right. And I think Elvis Presley kind of gets a lot of flack because he is kind of that the figure that everyone attributes that to. But I think he was so successful at doing that. I think that he obviously got so much success from that approach, and he had his own songs. It's not like he stole everything, but I think being considered one of the kings of rock and roll and really taking it to the top, I think that Elvis Presley almost gets a pass to a certain extent, because he did it in a way that no one else probably could. And I think there can be one. If you're at the top, you got to be the best. And so these other individuals, I think the focus could just be more on the entire situation, where we just saw this reoccurring pattern, rather than focusing on Elvis Presley is what I think I'm trying to get at, because it was clearly something that occurred over and over again. And a lot of these artists, although they were more successful than previous artists in the genre, they never matched the financial or commercial success of some of these other artists. And sometimes, especially during those times, artists were taking the songs, and it's not like today where you have YouTube or all these other avenues where someone would immediately say, this is a song that was done by somebody else, or there would be a clear copyright, flag that would pop up right away. So a lot of times you have people listening to completely different radio stations, and those radio stations are going to play, songs only by those artists, or a a certain range of artists. And especially when you're talking about people taking songs from the R&B charts and putting them into the pop charts, it was especially damaging because a lot of radios played within those top 40 or just the pop chart arena. So a lot of people are going to only hear this version of the song, and that's what they're going to attribute the song to. So they're getting, just kind of it's a really a big boost. I think if you think about it in today's terms, it's not as, it's not as damaging, just because, you'll hear covers here and there, and one way or another, you're probably going to find out, who the original person is. Usually, just because of the way that music business is run now, the individual is going to at least get, royalties or something out of that. And in this case, some of the artists did get royalties, but I think at that point, in a lot of cases, the damage had been done. And regardless, just because of the social and cultural climate, it was a bigger deal. So I think that, like I said, I think Elvis gets overly focused on for this, for, kind of borrowing or, stealing, taking, however you want to take it. But overall, the bottom line is it was a reoccurring pattern, and I think there's, you don't want to conflate or confuse, the sort of borrowing or taking of music and the influence, because as we know, as blues grew and this genre grew, it influenced everybody. And rock and roll, rock, the resurgence of sort of this blues rock and what it evolved into, it was all based on and influenced by these artists on the timeline. So you want to make sure you separate those also, because the same thing was happening within the culture. From you can see a clear evolution of blues and R&B and rock and roll as we continue to move up to other genres, and they were doing the same thing to a certain extent, and we had artists doing the same thing. But one of the things, and why I think it's such a good place to talk about cultural appropriation, is because when you're evolving music that way, and these artists are kind of, because artists have copied or taken elements from music, since the beginning, but there's a difference when you're kind of paying tribute, or you're appreciating it because, this individual is from your culture, you can relate to it, and you're kind of taking it and applying it to your own music. And, or some of the later artists who may not have been in the culture, who have a clear, who didn't take the music, but have a clear, understanding, and spent, did their due diligence and really, studying the music, and then taking elements and putting that into their own music. So I think there's, some big differences in there, and, that should be more of the focus than kind of singling out some of these individual artists. Anyways, so Fats Domino, he, after this happened, the first time with Pat Boone, the same thing had happened again with Ricky Nelson when he recorded I'm Walkin'. And that song really launched Ricky Nelson's career. He was like a young, kind of a sensation, teenage, pop sensation at the time. And so because of this, Fats Domino, he really, looked at his music and tried to retool some of his songs